That's Toby. Toby's pushing everyone into the room. He's got a gavel. He's very excited. But we can start. I would love to, because we're on the clock. I need to start with a thank you, though, Jeannette. You were one of the very first people to support our little event here. And I would love to know, because until recently, you and your firm invested in early-stage consumer startups and corporate startups. Where does your passion for resilience come from?
You know, it's actually interesting you say that, because I originally started La Familia back in 2015 because I really felt passionate about building technology for European sovereignty. Mm-hmm. I think the main rationale for starting La Familia really was to combust a solid ecosystem to truly help, European founders kind of reach global category ambition. And that, for me, comes down to partnerships, comes down to truly activating Europe in multiple ways. So I think it's never been so focused around how do we just invest into seed companies. It was always anchored around the thought of how do we activate Europe.
What's special about resilience in Europe right now?
Look, I think there's, if you look at the past 5 years, a lot has happened, right? We had a pandemic, we had a war on European soil for the first time in a couple of decades, we had an energy crisis, we're seeing increasing signs of reglobalization. And if you come from a German industrial Mittelstand background like me, and if you grew up in a city like Duisburg, which is, maybe the American equivalent would be Pittsburgh, or if you look in the UK, I think you see these signs of deindustrialization, then this is an alarming sign, right? Because a lot of our economy, and Germany still being the sort of fourth largest economy in the world, is powered by these industrial players. So I think when you look at what needs to happen from a technology ecosystem perspective, then we need to become a lot more intentional about driving that embedded knowledge that we have in these established industry processes into the next generation, and become intentional around creating technological sovereignty. And I think this comes down to activating the best talent that we have in Europe. We have an amazing density of talent, and routing that talent to the biggest problems, and then be intentional about how to structure these problems in a partnership dimension.
Speaking of partnerships, about 11 months ago, you joined forces with General Catalyst. Any regrets?
No, at all. Quite the opposite. So if you think about the mission of GC, it has always extended far beyond the idea of just investing into serendipitous technology innovation. So I think Hemant and I actually met right after I started La Familia. And him and I always connected on the fact of we shouldn't just fund companies to then be sold to Google and Facebook, but what we should be doing is thinking about funding companies that can actually take on industry transformations, and how do we actually get there. In the context of these past 7 years, we've co-invested into 8 companies like Stripe, like Applied Intuition, like Maven, like Mistral, Ramp, and most recently Housing. And I think we've always just been very mission-aligned in that. And if you think about how Europe and the European technology ecosystem has evolved over the past 7, 8 years, it has matured substantially. You have a lot more early-stage funding available. We have combusted a lot of scale-ups and sort of successful companies that are now kind of becoming increasingly international. But I think we're still lacking this intentionality around shaping winners. Mm-hmm. So you look at Housing, if you look at Mistral, putting significant amounts of capital behind these companies in order to really give them a shot at scale is what I couldn't yet do on my own. And I think partnering with GC and tapping on the availability of capital, but also the experience and the platform capabilities and this creative entrepreneurial mindset that is very much kind of the DNA of that firm is very enriching and very empowering.
GC is not the only firm addressing resilience. Across the pond, there's Andreessen Horowitz, and they have a different philosophy. What's the difference between General Catalyst's global resilience and Andreessen's American dynamism?
It's interesting you say that. So if you think of Andreessen, I think there's this famous quote, I don't actually know if it's true, that Mark Andreessen doesn't possess a passport because he doesn't like to travel. So it's a very, if you think about what that means, it's a very American-centric firm. So I think American dynamism says it, right? It comes down to how do we build for national interest. But if you think about what makes successful companies, these are all global companies, right? So for me, that doesn't compute. I think you need to think about a company that is set up to really reach global scale. And that I think it cannot be driven or narrowed down by national interest, but it should really be thinking about how do we activate, especially if you think about the three largest democracies, and that's where GC is playing, how do you activate the US, Europe, and potentially India, and really drive synergies between the three continents to help companies succeed?
Yeah. As an early stage investor, you often invest in people first and ideas second. Is there a marked difference between a founder that's building a commercial application versus a resilient or defensive application?
Well, listen, I think, let's maybe take a step back. I think if you look at the evolution of technology, especially in Europe, we haven't really succeeded at any of the prior waves at scale, right? If you think of consumer, if you think of, let's say, the internet wave, cloud and mobile, we had structural deficiencies that really didn't allow us to lean in. I think now with AI, because it's not a disruptive technology, because it's actually a transformative technology, it gives us the opportunity to truly activate the vertical strengths that I was mentioning earlier. And now, if you think about the talent that is needed to do that, you need talent that is essentially able to grasp these nuances, right? Because these are nuances that are very particular. And if you think about the health sector, if you think about industrial manufacturing or the process industry, these are incredibly large sectors that are very, very complex in the way that they're designed. So I think you need people that are able to lean into that knowledge density and really kind of have an internal perspective that they can then sort of intersect with AI, such as Mistral, for example, to truly help these verticals activate. So that's one. I think that comes down to just the DNA. The second part that I think is needed is we need founders that really have that global ambition, right? If you think about a lot of the companies that are or have been funded over the past decades in Europe, there hasn't been enough really ambitious goalpost setting. So for me, ambition means how about us making sure we get 3 out of the 10 largest global technologies be European in 10 years? Like, what does it take to truly build that? And I think it comes down to embedding these founders in a partnership ecosystem. So don't let them build in isolation, but actually help them connect to the Mittelstand, help them connect to these large corporates that are world market leaders in their field, help them connect to governments, if you think about the case of Helsing, and then see what happens. And if you think of the example of Helsing, and I think you all saw Gunther yesterday, it's not only an incredibly ambitious team, but it's a team that has seen global scale. It's a team that is embracing partnerships to the max. And it's a team that is so purpose and mission driven that it's just magnetic to global talent, right? If you think about the folks they've hired onto on board from Facebook, who's been leading their global fair lab, if you think of Robert Falk, who was the head of engineering at Palantir, these are very high caliber people to join a very early stage company. And it has led to Helsing being the first company or the fastest company ever to reach a program of record, faster than Anduril. So I think there's this blend of ambition, knowledge pool, and partnership ability that helps these companies really combust. And I think that sets a company like Helsing up to become a global category leader in the sense that I just mentioned earlier.
Now, it seems to me, and the data supports this, that most of the venture capital money right now in security and defense are going into firms that utilize AI at a very high degree. Why is that?
Well, I think it's probably the largest technology lever we've seen in a long time. And I think we're only at the early innings of it. And I think the position we're taking as a firm is that we're very much leaning into applied AI, which for us means you need to be very flexible and creative in the way that you embrace this technology. Because it's fundamentally, if you look about in the way that software SaaS companies have been built, they were basically orientating themselves around human-defined processes. They were limited by kind of just where human workflows naturally began and ended. If you think about what AI is ultimately able to do, it can take you all the way from intent to goal, right, in very novel ways that we cannot fully anticipate yet. So I think you need to find a framework and a mindset in each vertical to understand, like, how would the industry dynamics really be impacted, and not shy away from, does this involve physical assets? Does this potentially involve some service component initially? But really set these companies up to embrace the full structural shift that is on the horizon. So I think that's the way we're thinking about it. We've done a ton of work in the service sector, accounting, law, and customer support for one angle, but we are doing increasing amounts of work when it comes to all these very sort of native industrial sectors, such as manufacturing in Europe, such as defense, and really think about what is the transformation angle to truly activate these verticals.
Yeah. You helped write the AI Act for Europe. Do you think the framework in place is strong enough to protect consumers, but allow European companies to compete on a global scale, like specifically against American AI companies?
Well, first of all, I didn't help write it, right? I think that I wasn't eager to regulate at all. I was actually just eager to stop that Parliament version. I don't know if you all recall, but last year in May, the Parliament released a version of regulation that would have been completely suffocating to the European ecosystem. And so I stepped up with a few other European leaders to really create awareness around that problem. And thankfully, I think we landed in a place where the regulatory framework is not amazing because it's still overbearingly bureaucratic, which is something we have to solve for at a European scale. But it is at least not deadly. So I think it's something you can work with. Now we're actually working on the last part of understanding how we can drive the standardization norms and guidelines to a degree where they give us enough maneuver room to build companies. I think it's very dangerous to regulate these technologies too early. What I will say, though, is you also need to understand where governments are coming from, right? I think we, and many of us in this room, are working and interacting with technologists every day. We do understand what technology can or cannot yet do. If you are a politician and you have been watching the news around GPT, especially in the first half of last year, you thought the world might potentially come to an end, right? So I think you have to protect civic interests. And that's where you need to really work with lawmakers and try to understand their concerns and really help kind of find common ground as to how these concerns can be addressed. And yet kind of give room to innovation. Because I think the one thing we cannot miss out on is making sure we really use this technology to the max. If we miss out on AI in Europe, it will take us a very long time to recover from it.
Just this week, Facebook announced Llama, 3.2. But just like 3.1, which is an extremely powerful model, it's not available in Europe. Mark Zuckerberg said that. How do you compete? How do you resolve that issue?
Well, listen, I think... Well, as you know, I'm probably biased here, but we backed Mistral, and this is actually an amazing example of what European DNA can do. If you take a step back and think about who has been driving the frontier of AI globally in terms of research, these are mostly Europeans. Think of Geoffrey Hinton, Yann LeCun, but these people have European DNA and are kind of working with large US technology companies. And now think of the genesis of Mistral. You had 3 young researchers. 2 of them built the Llama model initially and wrote the Llama paper, and one actually wrote the Chinchilla paper at DeepMind. These are people that are highly sophisticated in knowing what they're doing. And these are people that have then stepped forward and said, we need to build a model that's really befitted to European purpose, meaning being enterprise-oriented and being a great partner that can be trusted from an open source component to really work and embrace the European frameworks and also be able to embrace these nuances I was mentioning earlier from an enterprise platform and tooling perspective. So that is where Mistral is headed. Their model is equally good to that of Llama or OpenAI if you look at the benchmarks. And what we need to do now is just make sure this company lands. This company has everything, all the DNA it takes to be activated. And now what we need to do is make sure we really help them intersect and help them really land on especially a European customer base, next to sort of the global customers that they're working with, because that is the real chance we have. I care less about Llama. I care more about us really stepping forward and shaping a global category leader out of Europe.
That was a good answer. Thank you for that. Now, the data also says that unless you're Anthropic, Mistral, OpenAI, you're going to struggle to raise late-stage capital because these foundational models are so good now. How do early-stage companies still compete against that?
Well, I think the question is, on the foundational model side, I would say we probably have a set of companies that are shaping up to be global winners. I don't think you will see many more emerging. And I think there is a question around what is the product? Is the product the model? Is the product the platform? I think there's still question marks around that. It's a very fast-moving space.
Yes.
What I will say is there are basically 2 diverging trains of thought. One is I will throw as much compute at synthetic data generation and at any kind of impact that would still give me more scale and really help these models just become better at generalizing.
Absolutely.
Which is very cost intensive. And I think you would need to believe that one central model will be as good as 190 IQ biochemist, 190 IQ physicist in all these given fields, or you say, well, listen, there's a post-training component, there's an applied research component when it comes to data efficiency, latency, and really making sure these models become smart around embracing specific industry problems to really then help drive value in those areas, and also be safe and create the guardrails, especially if we look at a sector like health, for example, that truly make sure these models don't harm customers or harm consumers. So to me, I think there are these players that will continue pushing for general intelligence. Let's see where they land. I think it's an interesting game to watch. I'm more focused around how do we actually make sure we take the part that drives resiliency into our industry and make sure these models truly find product market fit there.
So we have these large companies doing these foundational models that are the underpinning for a lot of things. Where do you see green space or opportunity for other AI startups to enter right now?
Look, I think the thing that most founders aren't spending enough time on is understanding the end customer and the verticals deep enough. Mm-hmm. If you look at one of our portfolio companies, Hippocratic, what they're doing is incredibly exciting. What they're basically building is a voice model or voice AI to basically create digital nurses, right? And if you think about what that entails, it's an incredibly complex technology where they need to be good at prescribing, they need to be good at understanding any given patient in any given context, etc. So this is a very specific use case that can unlock huge value for hospital systems. And this comes down to really understanding what is it that the customer really needs and wants at this moment. So what we're spending a ton of time on with our founders right now is really putting them in front of customers where we believe big value can be extracted, and then really work together with them on understanding how we can shape a new vertical application in that sector. So that's where we're most focused on.
We're almost out of time, but I always like to end these interviews with investors on advice. What's your advice to founders on how to approach your firm? What do you look for out of a pitch?
Well, listen, I think, first of all, our door is always open. My email, even my phone number is pretty much out there. So I think I'm interacting with a lot of founders on a daily basis. And it's actually one of the most enriching parts of this job. It's just speaking to brilliant, curious minds and staying at the forefront of that vibrancy. I think it's very energizing. Second of all, if you think about what these founders typically look for is somebody to dream with. So I like dreaming with them. I like actually leaning into them telling me something I cannot unsee anymore. And that is fundamentally what I flock to. If you look at especially early stage investing, which is part of our performance strategy at GC, we really want to lean into seed, and we want to lean into this early ambiguity of where companies are still to be formed behind talent and ambitious dreams. It comes down to truly embracing their vision, and oftentimes the best founders tell you a reality you cannot unsee anymore. I remember very well when Torsten and Guntbert and Niklas were just about to start Helsing. We went for a walk, and Ukraine hadn't happened. Defense really wasn't a sexy industry. It was actually, especially if you look at European investment fund standards, it was actually an industry that was in the same bucket as lottery and pornography. And so here you had three super ambitious, incredibly qualified, and founders that really wouldn't need to do that for any reason, but to truly build for sovereignty and build into our deterrent stack. So the best founders are typically seismographic to societal change. And if you capture that seismographic trend early and you lean into that and you give them capital, you give them resources and everything they need, then I think we do have the chance and have a good shot at building towards the next European Renaissance. And that's what I'm focused on.
That's a great place to end it. Thank you so much, Jeannette. Give her a round of applause.